I knew my stepdad Kevin was serious the moment he slid an envelope across our kitchen table and told me I owed him rent, because I was 15 years old, still smelling like sweat from football practice, and he said it like it was the most normal thing in the world, $200 a month starting next week, and if I could not pay then I could figure out somewhere else to live. My mom stood at the sink with her hands in dishwater and did not look at me, and that tiny detail is what still messes with me, because it told me right away I was on my own even inside my own house. Kevin called it responsibility, but it was really a leash, and I learned fast that every paycheck I earned at my after-school pizza job was going to end up in his hand. Cash in an envelope, no receipts, no thank you, just him acting like he was doing me a favor by letting me exist under his roof. Then the day I graduated high school he did the thing that turned my stomach into ice. He gave me a paper with a deadline, 45 days to get out, like I was a tenant he was done with, not a kid who had nowhere to go. I thought that was the worst of it until I discovered he had been using my identity behind my back. Taxes, bills, stuff that could ruin my future before it even started. And when I finally pushed back and crawled my way into a stable life, I made one stupid little decision at a gas station that flipped the whole power dynamic overnight. I bought a scratch-off ticket. And I won big. The kind of big that makes people show their true face. Because the second Kevin found out, the man who charged a teenager rent and kicked him out started demanding half like he had earned it. And that is when I realized the fight was never about money, it was about ownership, and he still thought he owned me. The problem with survival plans when you are 17 is that your life is already packed tight with obligations that do not care about your panic, so I kept going to school, kept going to work, kept pretending I was normal enough to laugh in the hallway and talk about prom like my future was not a countdown clock. And every day I carried the knowledge of that eviction date like a stone in my pocket. I started saving every tip, every extra shift, every paycheck, and it still did not feel like enough because the cheapest apartments in our part of northern Illinois wanted deposits and proof of income and a credit history, and I had none of that. I was a kid with a bruised pride and a bank account that looked like a joke. Kevin sensed the pressure building and did what he always did when he smelled weakness. He tightened the screws, he started inspecting the fridge and commenting on what I ate, started asking where I was every time I left, started making little comments about how some people end up under bridges when they do not listen, and my mom would flinch at those lines like she wanted to cover her ears. The enemies were not just him either, because once you are labeled the kid who will be gone soon people treat you differently, and I learned that even adults who smile at you can still step over you if it keeps their life smooth. Like the assistant manager at the pizza place who promised me more hours and then gave them to his cousin, or the landlord who told me he might have a basement studio and then stopped answering when he realized I was 18 with no cosigner. I tried the usual teenage options, friends, couches, maybe staying with my girlfriend at the time, but nothing felt stable, and I hated the idea of showing up at someone's house with my trash bag of clothes and that look on my face that says please rescue me, because I could already hear Kevin's voice in my head calling me pathetic. The worst part was how Kevin kept my rent as a leash because every time I paid him he would make some comment about how he was teaching me responsibility, and once I asked for a written receipt because I had started thinking about taxes and proof and all the adult stuff you suddenly learn when you are scared, and Kevin's face changed in this subtle way like a smile that never reaches the eyes, and he said, "You don't trust me," and I said, "It is not about trust, I just want records," and he leaned in close enough that I could smell coffee on his breath, and he said, "Careful, because you are not in a position to accuse anyone of anything." That line stuck with me because it sounded like a threat but also like a confession, like there was something underneath all his rules that he did not want anyone looking too hard at, and I started noticing things I used to ignore, envelopes from collection agencies that disappeared fast, calls he took in the garage with the door half closed, the way he would get tense when my mom mentioned paperwork. Graduation came and went in a blur. A hot June day with folding chairs and parents holding up phones, and Kevin did not clap when my name was called. He just checked his watch like he was waiting for the clock to release him. And that night at home he slid the paper across the table again and told me my 45 days started now, and my mom's eyes were shiny but she still did not speak. I moved out before the 45 days were up, not because I was ready but because I could not breathe in that house anymore, and I ended up renting a tiny room in a guy's split level near Crest Hill. Basically a converted basement space with a mini fridge and a sad little window that looked at a patch of weeds, and I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was a launch pad, but the first night alone I sat on the edge of that mattress and felt like the floor might drop out from under my life. I worked more, took a warehouse job in the mornings and kept the pizza place at night, and I would come home too tired to eat anything but whatever I could microwave, and every time I looked at my bank app one felt this mix of pride and dread. Pride because I was doing it, dread because one injury or one layoff would turn my whole plan into dust. Then Kevin showed up again in a different way because a few months after I moved out I got a letter from the IRS that made my hands go cold. It said there was an issue with my tax return, except I had not filed anything yet. I was 19 and still trying to figure out what a W-2 even was, and I stared at that letter like it was written in a foreign language, but the key part was clear: someone had already claimed me. I called my mom first, because even with everything, you still reach for what feels familiar when you are scared, and she answered in that same soft voice and said, "Kevin handled your paperwork. He said he would take care of it," and I felt my throat tighten as I asked what exactly he took care of, and she hesitated just long enough to make my stomach sink, and then she said, "I don't know, honey, he said it was easier. He said you would mess it up." I drove to their house that night and knocked until Kevin opened the door with that expression that said he was already annoyed, and I held up the letter and asked why the IRS thought I filed a return, and he did not even blink. He said, "I did you a favor, you got a refund," and I felt my face get hot as I asked where that refund was, and he smiled again and said, "I applied it to what you owe me, because you left with unpaid rent and that room you stayed in cost money." And I realized then that the rent had not been about teaching me anything. It had been a pipeline, a way to siphon cash and keep me too busy to question him. I left before I said something that would get me arrested, but the anger followed me home, and it sat with me in that little basement room while I tried to sleep, and that night I decided I was done being confused, done being intimidated by paperwork, done letting him treat my life like his property. I did not find help in some dramatic movie moment. I found it in a cramped little office wedged between a tax prep place and a vape shop, with a faded sign that said Community Legal Aid and a bell on the counter that sounded like it had been tapped 1,000 tired times by people who were already halfway to giving up. I walked in there on my lunch break with my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped the IRS letter, and I remember thinking that if they brushed me off I was going to have to swallow the whole thing and just live with whatever damage Kevin had done, because I did not have money for a real lawyer and I sure as hell did not have a family willing to go to war for me. The woman who came out to greet me was named Denise. Late 40s maybe, hair pulled back like she did not have time to fuss, eyes sharp but not unkind, and she did something that instantly made me feel exposed. She listened like she had heard this exact kind of story before, and she was not surprised by it, which was both comforting and horrifying because it meant I was not crazy, but it also meant guys like Kevin were common. I told her everything in one messy rush: the rent at 15, the paper that gave me 45 days after graduation, the no receipts, the threats when I asked questions, the IRS letter that said I filed when I never did, and while I was talking she was already pulling forms and writing notes and circling things like my life was a file she could actually organize into something solvable. Denise asked for my ID and my social security card if I had it, asked where I lived now, asked when I moved out, asked if I ever signed anything giving Kevin permission to handle my finances, and when I said no she did not gasp or do that pity face people do, she just nodded and said, "Then we treat this like what it is, fraud." She explained it in plain language, like she was giving me directions to a place I had never been but could still reach if I kept driving, and she had me file an identity theft affidavit, helped me request tax transcripts, told me to freeze my credit, and told me to start a paper trail right now because men like Kevin live off the fact that most people are too embarrassed to document what is happening. Then something shifted in the room, something small but heavy, when she asked me my stepdad's full name and date of birth. And I said it without thinking because it was burned into my brain from years of hearing it on mail and paperwork. And Denise paused with her pen hovering over the page like it suddenly weighed more. She stared at the name for a second, then looked up at me and said, "Where did he used to live before he married your mom?" And I shrugged because I only knew the vague story he told at barbecues, that he moved around for work, that he got a fresh start, that kind of thing. Denise stood up and walked to a filing cabinet, and I watched her pull out a folder so thick it looked like it had its own gravity, and she came back and laid it on the desk with the kind of carefulness you use when you are setting down something dangerous. She did not say gotcha or I knew it, she just opened it and slid one page toward me, and on that page was a mugshot of a man who looked like Kevin but also not like Kevin, like a version of him from a few years earlier before he learned how to hide behind khakis and calm voices. Same eyes, though, those same eyes that measure people for weakness. Above the photo was a different last name. Denise tapped the paper and said, "I cannot give you all of this, but I can tell you that your stepdad has been in our system before under another name, and not for anything small." I felt my skin go cold because part of me had always believed he was just a cruel guy with control issues, and now I was staring at proof that cruelty was just one tool in a bigger toolkit. My first reaction was stupid and human. I said, "Are you sure?" because my brain wanted to reject it, wanted to keep Kevin as just my personal villain, not someone with a history that made him feel more real and more dangerous. Denise nodded and said, "He is careful, he changes addresses, he changes names, he targets people who will not fight back." And she said that last part while looking directly at me like she was handing me a choice. Fight back or become another quiet victim in a stack of files. She told me this was not just about fixing my taxes, This was about stopping him from using me as a financial identity he could keep draining. That is when she connected me with Mark Hensley, a private attorney who worked with them sometimes on cases that needed heavier muscles. And Mark was the opposite of Kevin in the best way, steady, not flashy, the kind of guy who asks questions like he is building a map. He went through my transcripts and credit report and started finding things that made my stomach twist: a utility account in my name that I never opened, a payday loan inquiry, a change of address request that had rerouted some of my mail for months, and suddenly all those years of Kevin being weird about paperwork and calling it family business made perfect sense. He had not just been taking rent, he had been building a little machine where my identity was another line of income. The plot twist that really messed me up was not the extra accounts, it was what Mark found when he pulled the detailed tax history. Kevin had filed a return in my name and then listed a bank account for the refund deposit that did not belong to me, and the account was tied to that other last name from the folder. Kevin was not just stealing from me, he was juggling identities, using one name for the neighborhood and another name for the money. It made my hands shake with this weird mix of fear and relief, because fear, obviously, but relief because it meant my gut had been right for years. He was not teaching responsibility. He was running a scam. Mark warned me that the second Kevin realized we were looking under the hood, he would get loud, and he was right. Kevin started calling my mom and saying I was trying to destroy the family. Kevin started leaving me voicemails that sounded almost friendly at first, telling me to stop being dramatic, telling me he could explain everything, and then when I did not respond, the tone shifted into something darker, saying I was making enemies I could not afford, saying I was going to regret it. The old version of me would have folded just to make the noise stop, but Denise and Mark had already taught me the trick. Noise is what people make when they are scared someone is about to see the truth. The climactic moment of Act 3 hit on a rainy Thursday evening when Mark asked me to come into his office after work because he said he found something time-sensitive. I showed up still in my warehouse boots, hands smelling like cardboard and machine grease, and Mark had a printout on his desk with a series of transactions highlighted. He told me that the utility account in my name had been used at my mom's address, which sounded obvious until he pointed to the payment method. The bills were being paid with money orders purchased in small increments, the kind people use when they do not want a clear bank trail, and Mark said that pattern was consistent with someone laundering cash from somewhere else. Then he leaned back and said something that made the room feel smaller. He said Kevin may be involved in a larger fraud scheme, and your identity is not the only one he has used. That means this is not just you versus him. This is you versus a man who has made a habit of turning people into tools. And that means we do everything clean, everything documented, because if this escalates, we want you to be the witness, not the suspect. I walked out of that office and sat in my car while the rain ticked against the windshield, and for a minute I felt that same powerless panic I felt at 15, like the world was too big and I was too small, and then something else cut through it, something I had not felt in a long time. Anger with direction. Not rage that makes you reckless, but anger that makes you careful. I was done being the kid in the kitchen paying rent to a man who treated me like a bank account with legs. Denise helped me file amended paperwork. Mark filed formal disputes, and within weeks something happened that felt like a tiny miracle. The IRS released a corrected refund directly to me after the fraud report, not a huge amount, but enough that when I saw it hit my account I sat on my couch and laughed like a crazy person, because it was proof that the system could work when you pushed the right buttons, and it was proof that Kevin was not untouchable. That is how the lottery moment happened, and I know it sounds ridiculous, but it is true in the way life is sometimes weirdly poetic. A few days after that refund landed, I stopped at a gas station after a night class, exhausted, head full of numbers and deadlines, and I saw the scratch-offs behind the counter. I had never been a lottery guy, not really, because my whole life had been about not relying on luck, but something in me wanted one small reckless choice that belonged only to me, not to survival, not to Kevin, not to fear. I bought one ticket, $10, and I scratched it in my car with my key under the yellow parking lot lights. At first I thought I was reading it wrong. Then my stomach flipped and my hands started shaking so hard the ticket trembled. The prize amount was so big it looked fake. $1 million. I sat there with my mouth open and my heart pounding like I had just run a sprint. And the only thought I could form was, this is going to change everything. Then another thought arrived right behind it, cold and immediate. Kevin is going to find out. And the terrifying part was not that he would demand money. It was that I had just learned he was not only cruel, he was practiced, and he had been wearing a mask for years. The money was not just a blessing anymore. It was a spotlight. And when you shine a spotlight on someone like Kevin, they either run or they attack. The first thing people do when they get sudden money is imagine spending it, but the first thing I did was imagine Kevin finding out, because trauma trains your brain like that, and my excitement immediately mixed with dread, like joy that comes with a shadow. I drove straight to Mark's office with the ticket tucked inside my wallet like it could evaporate, and he did not smile when I told him. He just said, "Do not tell anyone yet, do not sign anything yet, do not even cash it yet until we secure it properly," and he walked me to a bank where we put it in a safe deposit box, and he had me take photos and copies for records, and he said, "This is a blessing, but it can also become a magnet for people who think they are owed your life." I told my best friend Tyler that night because I needed one human voice in my corner, and Tyler just sat on my couch with his hands on his knees like he was trying not to freak out on my behalf, and he said, "Man, you deserve this," and that simple sentence hit harder than I expected, because deep down I still carried that old message that I had to earn the right to exist. When I finally claimed the prize through the state process, I did it quietly, through a trust Mark helped set up, and when the money landed after taxes and fees, it was not the headline 1 million everyone imagines, but it was still life-changing, enough to pay off my student debt, enough to buy a modest house, enough to breathe without calculating every grocery trip. For about 2 weeks I lived in this strange bubble where the world looked the same but felt different, like colors were sharper and time moved slower, and then the bubble popped the way it always does, because my mom called me late one night and her voice was trembling, and she said, "Kevin knows," and I felt my stomach drop like I was back in that kitchen at 15. I asked how he knows, and she said she does not know, but he saw something, he heard something. She said he has been watching your social media and asking questions, and then she whispered he is angry, and I heard Kevin in the background yelling my name like he had a right to it. I did not go to their house, I did not pick up Kevin's calls, I texted my mom that she could talk to me without him present, and within an hour Kevin was calling from different numbers, leaving voicemails that swung from syrupy to violent, saying he was proud of me, saying he always believed in me, saying he deserved his share, and then saying if I did not do the right thing he would make sure everybody knew what kind of person I was. The climactic moment of Act 4 hit on a Sunday afternoon when I walked out of my apartment building with a bag of laundry and saw Kevin's truck parked across the street, and for a second my brain did this old survival thing where it tried to make me small, tried to make me disappear, but then the driver door opened and Kevin got out like he owned the sidewalk, smiling like we were old pals. He called my name and walked toward me, and he was older, heavier, but the same sharpness lived in his eyes, and he said, "Look at you, big shot now," and I could feel my pulse in my throat, and he said, "We need to talk about what is fair." I said, "We do not need to talk," and he laughed like I was joking, and he said, "I raised you, I fed you, I put a roof over your head, you owe me," and then he said the number out loud, half, and hearing it spoken like a demand made my hands clench. I told him, "You made me pay rent at 15, you kicked me out with a deadline like I was garbage, you used my name for loans and taxes, you took from me for years," and his smile slipped for a second, and then his face hardened and he said, "Careful, because I can make your life real uncomfortable," and he stepped closer so I could smell his cologne and his entitlement. The worst part is that people like Kevin know exactly where to aim. He knew my soft spot was my mom, so he said, "If you do not do the right thing, your mother is going to suffer," and my chest went tight with anger so hot it felt like steam, because the threat was not even hidden, it was plain as day. Tyler was in my doorway behind me, and I did not even realize he had stepped outside until I heard him say, "Hey, you need to back up," and Kevin glanced at him like Tyler was a fly, and then Kevin reached into his jacket and my brain flashed danger, because I did not know if he had a weapon or a stack of papers or what, and what he pulled out was a folder. He waved it like a flag and said, "I have proof you agreed to pay me back," and I felt a cold calm settle over me because I knew that move, the fake authority, the bluff wrapped in paperwork, and I said to him, "You mean the rent ledger you kept, the one you refused to give receipts for?" And he smiled again and said, "Exactly," and he started talking louder, loud enough that a couple walking their dogs slowed down, and he said, "I have legal rights, I am family, I am entitled," and I could feel the old shame trying to crawl up my spine like it wanted to make me comply just to make the scene end. Instead I said, "Mark will speak to you," and Kevin's eyes narrowed, and he said, "Oh, you got a lawyer," and he spat the word lawyer like it was betrayal, and then he said, "Fine, I will handle it my way," and he turned and walked back to his truck, and as he climbed in he said, "This is not over," and he drove off like he had just served a warning shot. That night Mark moved fast, not with drama but with precision. He filed for a protective order based on harassment, he sent a cease and desist, he documented the encounter, and he reminded me that Kevin had a history of fraud that would not look good under scrutiny. Kevin responded the way a cornered man does. He escalated, he called my job, tried to claim I stole money from him. He showed up at my mom's church and told people I was abandoning family. He sent my mom long texts that made her cry. And then he crossed the line that made everything snap into focus because he tried to file a claim that the lottery ticket was purchased with money he had given me, and that therefore he had a right to the winnings. It was ridiculous, but ridiculous things become dangerous when they get traction, and the climactic moment of Act 4 became the court hearing where Kevin stood in front of a judge with that same calm confidence he used on my mom, and he told a story where he was the hardworking father figure and I was the ungrateful son, and he tried to make my rent payments sound like some kind of agreement to repay him for raising me. When it was my turn, Mark had me speak, and my legs felt like they were made of wood. But my voice did not break, because I had been carrying this story for years and I was done swallowing it. I told the judge about being 15 and handing over cash, about being threatened when I asked for receipts, about the IRS letter, about the utility account in my name, about being given 45 days to disappear, and I watched Kevin's face tighten as the narrative shifted away from his control. Then Mark dropped the piece that made the room go quiet because he had pulled records showing Kevin had filed returns in my name after I moved out, and that he had taken refunds, and that he had attempted to open credit in my name, and suddenly Kevin was not a stern parent with an entitlement argument. He was a man with a pattern, and patterns matter in court. Kevin's lawyer tried to object, tried to frame it as family misunderstanding, but the judge's eyes stayed sharp, and the judge asked Kevin point blank if he had permission to use my identity for any financial account, and Kevin hesitated just a beat too long, and that beat felt like a cliff edge because you could see the lie forming and you could see the judge watching. Kevin said he thought he did. He said it was family. He said it was implied, and the judge's face did not soften, and the judge granted the protective order and warned Kevin about further harassment. And then, almost like an afterthought but with a weight that landed on my chest, the judge said if there are credible allegations of identity fraud, that is not a civil matter alone, and the judge advised that the records could be referred for investigation. Kevin walked out of that courthouse looking smaller than I had ever seen him, not weak exactly, but exposed, and I stood on the steps outside with cold wind cutting across the parking lot and felt something I did not expect, not triumph but relief, like my nervous system finally got the message that the door was locked and the monster could not just wander in anymore. The resolution did not look like fireworks. It looked like normal days that finally felt safe. It looked like me paying off my car and deleting the loan apps off my phone. It looked like signing papers for a small 2-bedroom house with a yard big enough for a grill and a dog someday. It looked like taking my mom out to breakfast alone at a diner off the interstate where the coffee tastes burnt and comforting and nobody knows our business. My mom cried into her napkin that day, not loud, just quiet tears that kept coming, and she said, "I am sorry. I should have protected you, and I wanted to be angry, I really did, because the kid in me still wanted someone to finally pick me. But I also saw her as a woman who had been worn down slowly until she forgot what her own voice sounded like. And I told her I cannot change the past, but I can change what I accept now." And she nodded like those words were both a comfort and a warning. Kevin did not get half, he did not get a dime, and legally the story ended there, but emotionally it kept echoing because money does not just buy freedom, it tests the shape of your relationships, it shines a light into corners you did not realize were dark. My mom started making plans quietly, not dramatic plans, just practical ones, like putting her important documents somewhere Kevin could not grab them, like opening her own bank account, like talking to a counselor at her church, and I could see her waking up inch by inch, which was the only kind of miracle real life usually offers. The bittersweet part is that I could not rescue her with a check, not really, because if I handed her a pile of money Kevin would find a way to circle it like a shark, and also because I had spent too many years being the kid who solved adult problems, and I was trying to learn that saving someone is not the same as supporting them. So I did what I could do. I paid for her to see a therapist. I offered her a room in my house if she ever chose to leave. I told her the offer would not expire, and I meant it, but I also told her I would not meet Kevin halfway for her comfort, because comfort built on my silence was the same old cage with nicer paint. A few months after the hearing, Kevin broke the protective order by sending a letter to my house. Not threatening exactly, just dripping with bitterness, saying he hoped I enjoyed my blood money and that I would regret turning family into enemies. And I stared at the envelope for a long time before I handed it to Mark and let Mark handle it, because the new version of me did not need to wrestle every demon personally to prove I was strong. The open ending, the thing that still keeps me up sometimes, is my mom, because she has not left him yet, not fully. She has one foot on the shore and one foot still in the water, and I do not know which way she will go. And I hate that a part of me still wants to run in and drag her out, even though I know that is not how it works. Some nights I sit on my back steps with a cold soda and listen to the neighborhood quiet, the distant hum of traffic, a dog barking 2 houses over, and I think about how money did not heal my childhood. It just gave me room to finally feel it, to finally name it, to finally decide what kind of man I wanted to be. I could have chosen revenge, could have tried to burn Kevin's life down the way he tried to burn mine, and maybe part of me still fantasizes about that when I am tired or stressed. But the truth is I already won something bigger than the lottery. I won the ability to say no without shaking. I won the right to build a home that does not come with strings. I won a future where love is not something you pay rent for. If you take anything from my story, I hope it is this: people who demand you earn your place in their life will always move the goalposts, because the point was never your growth, the point was their control, and the day you stop negotiating with that kind of person feels terrifying at first, like stepping off a ledge, but it is also the day you realize the ground has been there the whole time, waiting for you to claim it. I still do not know what will happen with my mom. I still do not know if Kevin will find new ways to poison the air around her. And I still do not know if forgiveness is something I will ever feel. But I do know this: the kid who got charged rent at 15 is not living inside me the same way anymore. Because now when I lock my own front door at night, the click sounds like peace, and that is a kind of wealth nobody can demand half of.